So here, we're going to actually give you guys a cool demo of the actual solution. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Bartlett.
Thank you, Steve. I was just about to answer a question. There's one outstanding question in chat. If it doesn't get answered, I'll answer it after the session, after my part. So welcome to this part of the session. Let me share my screen. And this is, right, that is one. Can you see my screen? Can you see a screen?
And yeah.
Good, right, okay. Okay, let's share this. Can you see the presentation, Steve?
Got it, yeah, policy building blocks.
Yep, great stuff. Okay, we're ready to go. Okay, so before we actually start into the demo, let's take a look at the policy workflow on the AFC, the Aruba Fabric Composer. So just to remind everybody, AFC 6.2 will be the first release supporting the distributed service switch. And if you've been on the calls from the PLM team, you will be aware that with the release of 6.2, we can now implement policy with ACORs as well as now with the distributed firewalls on the DSS. So let's have a look at how the policies are built. So the process is going to be identical if we're dealing with ACORs policies or the firewall policy, but I shall focus on the process options for the firewall. So a policy is made up a number of building blocks, and we've got them here. The first is service qualifiers, and we'll go through these individually one by one in turn. Applications, this will be grayed out as part of the initial release. So at the moment, just to let you know, we are on beta code for both the AFC and PSM. So the code details have not quite been finalized. And service groups, this will also be changed at first release. This will be changed to groups as part of the initial AFC release. And then we've got our rules. And they're the building blocks that we will then apply to a policy. So we can have, we've got two options of configuring our policy. This is the one we'll be using for the demo. It's via the configuration policy groups. We've also can via the distributed services guided setup, if you like. There's some options here where we can manage policies and also create them as well. But for the purpose of understanding the building blocks, I'm going to focus on this side, because once you know the building blocks, it's very easy to work out exactly what's going on in the user interface when we configure a policy over here. So the first one, the first building block, service qualifiers. So all service qualifiers are nothing more than a UDP or a TCP port number that can be leveraged against a poly to permit or deny a flow. So there is a comprehensive list already pre-built into AFC that should cover a lot of scenarios. However, if those port references are not there, the administrator can create their own service qualifier group. So effectively, we can match against any ports, either be it TCP or UDP, should we wish to. The next one is applications. Now, this is now a roadmap feature, but just to give you some background on it, the idea behind it, the intent was to provide multiple service qualifiers and group them together, and you can give it an application label. But we'll see this hopefully sometime in the future in the roadmap on AFC. And the next one is policy building blocks, service groups. So this is going to be renamed to groups. So service groups are a very neat and tidy way of identifying endpoints, either via VM name, VM tag, or MAC or IP address, and grouping them together as a service group, and then we can apply this service group or group to a rule to align endpoints to a particular policy. And rules. So rules, we can create a rule at either be layer 2 or layer 3, not both, obviously. A rule is either providing a permit statement or a deny statement. And we could leverage service groups in this flow. So if this is a layer 4 policy, that rule that we're building out, we permit or deny use of service groups and then a service qualifiers. We can have both of these or just one. We'll certainly need a service qualifier, but the service groups is optional. And lastly, the policy blocks on building blocks on policies. So on this side here, we've got layer 2, layer 3 ACLs. On this side, if we create a policy name, we get the option of aligning it to the distributed firewall. Then we align our rules to this policy. The enforcers, effectively the fabric we wish to put this policy on, the direction, whether it be ingress or egress, the VRF, and the network in the form of VLANs that we wish to apply it to. So let's go into our demo topology for what's in the lab. So what we have is we've got 2 hosts, one on VLAN 10, host A, and we've got a host B on VLAN 20. And in between, we've got a DSS pair 1 and 2. They're VSX configured. And effectively, what we'll do is we'll run a ping and an RDP between the two, and then we'll apply our policy and we'll redirect our traffic to use the distributed firewall to block those flows. And before we start, though, what we'll do is we'll just check for VLAN redirection, because in normal flow of traffic, by default, is going to be just using the T3 forwarding capability of the switch. There's no redirection. We have to tell the switch to redirect the traffic to the DSM, the Pensando DSMs, to actually enforce the policy. That's the first thing. So we can check that with show DSM, the module number of the DSM, and the redirect to see if there's any VLANs being redirected. And we'll do that for the 2 DSM modules. And then we'll just get in the habit of jumping onto the flow table to see if there's any flows. So we shouldn't, before we start, we shouldn't expect to see any flows, and we'll kick off an ICMP and an RDP connection, and we'll see that they won't be going through the DSMs in the flow table. And then the next phase, what we'll do is then we'll redirect the VLAN. So this is going to be an egress policy that we're going to apply. And we're going to redirect, first of all, going to redirect VLAN 10 to flow through the DSMs. That's the first thing. We do this by, on the distributed services portion of the setup on AFC, we configure networks. And that configuration of a network will take the form of a VLAN, in this case in VLAN 10, and just by configuring that part of the user interface in AFC, that will redirect all traffic on VLAN 10 across both switches to the DSSs. But we've only got any outbound traffic from VLAN 10 and host A. So it's key to note that the policy is VLAN based, and it will apply across CX pair. And let's have a look, what else? So we've got the VLAN team redirect, and then once we run this show DSM and the module command, we should get a redirect for VLAN 10 on that. So the next part is applying our policy, which is very straightforward and easy to do. So you'll see how that works. And let's have a look. So what we'll have is an egress policy, and the source port is going to be random, of course, from the host, but the destination port for the TCP/RP connection, our RDP connection was going to be 83389. But what you'll see is that once we apply the policy, the outbound flow, what happens is that the return flow is automatically policed with the same policy that we apply. So in this case, we're going to be a deny policy for the outbound flow, and the return flow will also be denied coming back in again automatically. And the same will apply for the ICMP flow as well. And typically in the real world, of course, we wouldn't necessarily use the layer 4 firewall to block east-west traffic for ICMP. We're just doing this as an illustration for the lab. We'd use an ACL for that sort of thing. And okay, so I was going to jump, this is my cue actually to jump onto the lab. So let's do that. Right. Hopefully you're all with me on the lab. So we've got our Aruba Fabric Composer, and let's see, we've got our CX10000. So the first thing, what we need to do, just do show PSM, and this is telling us that actually this switch, along with the other one is been emitted by the PSM. And it's an important thing to know that that's actually the case. And we can actually validate that anyway for the switches we want to see. If we jump on the Pensando PSM directly, let's have a quick look. We're going to spend most of our time on, talk about again, I was talking and lost my finger concentration. No. Right, I will not speak while I type this. Yeah, I was multitasking when I was doing that. I was breathing in and out at the same time. Wonderful. Right, so this is the Pensando dashboard, and let's quickly go through this. We won't be doing any configuration on this, and of course, customers could do that. They could configure the PSM directly, but the AFC experience of the front end is so nice and so easy. So this is what we recommend. So dashboard, we've got 2 DSS switches. There's some stuff here that's been going on in the background. I've been rebooting switches, so don't worry about that. Let's have a look at the system. We can have a look at the cluster. Got 1 PSM in the cluster, and of course this is just for a lab setup. You can't have 1 PSM in a cluster in a real world environment, only for the lab. And if we look at the tenants, this is where all the configuration will happen. So if we look at VRFs, there's a number of VRFs it's already picked up. I've configured these earlier. It's obviously picked up the default VRF straight away and the number of ones I've used, but we're going to be using the default VRF. The networks, we don't have anything configured here, but when we apply our VLAN, that VLAN will pop up here as well. We'll revisit this at the very end once we've applied our policy, and check out the security policies as well, because they will pop up in this screen. So, okay. So go to the switch now. Let's go to the switch. So we've done the PSM. If I do a show DSM 11, there's quite a few options here, but I'm just going to go for the redirect option. So I'm looking for, there's no VLANs redirected. Let's check on DSM2, and that's going to be the same. Let's just pop that down. Let's make sure that we can connect to, keep that flow going, and also let's have a look. Let's connect to the RDP on the other to make sure that we've got a good connection. That's it. Yeah, that's looking good. Okay, I'm going to leave those up and running, and what we'll do, we'll revisit them after we've applied our policy. So the next thing we're going to do is jump onto the Fabric Composer. Let's log in. And here we are. So you'll probably be very familiar with this. We've got 2 switches only in our setup. They're all nice and healthy. You've seen the guide has said it before. If you've seen this, this is our normal workflow that we'd apply for leaf and spine layer 3 or layer 2 connectivity model from edge to core. And of course, now we've got this distributed services guided setup or features that we can apply. And the other one that we're going to be looking at is the policy and the configuration. So if I click on that, that will pull that up for us. So the first thing we need to do, as I mentioned in the slides, we need to redirect our VLAN that we want to apply our policy to the DSM. So that's what we're going to do under configure networks. So that comes up very nicely here. Action, add, and we've got VLAN 10. It is in fact VLAN 10. And I'm going to apply that. Right, so now if we go onto the switch here, if I do a show DSM redirect, you can now see VLAN 10 is redirected, meaning that all traffic now coming in from VLAN 10 is going to be redirected to the DSMs. In this case, it's going to be DSM 11. Okay, that's good. And if we go into, let's have a look at, did I spell that right? Yes, I did. The table flow. I go into the shell. Here we are. So if I can just go on to the PDS-CTL, make sure I've typed that correctly, show flow. You can see flows are building up already from, we've got UDP connections. I've got the 3389 active connection, and I've also got the ICMP connections and the return flow. Everything's allowed because we've got no policy pushed in. So that's what we're seeing here now. So let's go and build our policy. So let's just click that down. So let's go to configuration policy again, go to policies. Yes, here we are. So I mentioned the building blocks. So here's the service qualifiers. So let's have a look at those before we do anything. So you can see a great big list of service qualifiers, and most things should be in there, but we can always add a service qualifier of anything we care to mention in there to make a port up that if should it be missing that we actually want to apply a policy to. Applications I mentioned. This is now a roadmap item, so I won't look at that. Service groups, I've created service groups, but we're not going to be using or leveraging service groups as part of this because we've only got 2 endpoints. And rules. So the first thing I've done earlier, I've created the any rule. So just like ACLs, for instance, if we're doing a deny statement, if we don't permit anything afterwards, everything will be dropped. So we're going to create a deny rule. And the first thing we're going to do on that is create a deny rule for ICMP. So I'm going to call it ICMP deny. So we can follow what we're doing. I do not want to allow it. I want to deny it. So I want to drop. Service groups we're not using. Applications and service qualifiers. So all I need to do is click down on here and I get access to all the service qualifiers that are effectively inbuilt. There's ICMP, so that's nice and easy. Click next. Done. That's done. Now I need to do the same thing again for RDP. So I'm going to type in RDP deny, and settings going to be drop. And let's have a look. Service groups, we don't need those. Applications and service qualifiers, yes, we do need those. Let's have a look. Let's try and find RDP. Which are after R. It's an R. Where are you? There it is. So press next, and yes, so we're done. So we've created our rules. Like anything, now we need to apply those rules and match them to a policy. So that's what we do next. We create a policy. So that's what we do. We're applying add. let's have a look. Call it policy VLAN 10 tonight. We want to go to the distributed firewall. And like I mentioned earlier, if we wanted to create a layer 2 ACL, layer 3 ACL, we can do that via ASC, but we want to use a firewall for this. So keep that down. Rules now, this is nice and easy. I just add my rules that I want. So if I had a lot of pre-built rules, I would just go scroll down and select them, but I want all these. So I'm going to click all and I'm going to press apply. And you can see now, look, I've got ICMP deny, RDP deny, but also at the very top, I've got any. So I don't want that there, because if a flow comes in and hits that first rule, then everything's going to get matched to that, and we're letting everything through. So I'm just going to put any down to the bottom. Don't care which order these. Oops, no, I've done it too much. That's it. There we are. Don't care which order ICMP and RDP are in, but I do care about where any is, because that's my allow rule. In the full search now, it sounds a grand title, but all it really means is where do we want to put this policy? tgm.com is the fabric that we've only got one. We want it on ingress. We're going to use it on the VRF default. And the networks, we've only got one network configured for redirect via the DSM, which is VLAN 10. So I'm going to add that. Click next and press apply. Right, so now our policy is done. What should we do? What should we expect? Let's have a check to see what's going on. So you note that the ICMP flow is still working, and likewise, my RDP connection is still up. Now, the reason this is working like this is because it's an existing flow in the flow table that was allowed. So if we want to, so it's already seen it, the DSM's already seen it and allowed it. If now we've got a block policy, it will only block the next flow that it sees. So if I click this down, and then that's it. Now we've got a block on that, doesn't work, which is exactly how it should be. So I'll just move that over to the side there. No, I can't. Yes, I can. With ICMP, it's a bit different because, yeah, that's right. Eventually, I will get out of this. Okay, stop the ping. Now, if we go into the flow table now, show flow table. Now, what we should see in here is a deny, TCP deny. Now we've got that 3389 deny, that's in there. So that works fine. ICMP though, still active. Now ICMP, because it's not session based, it's got a different timer and it will time out after 90 seconds, along with UDP flows as well, by the way. So ICMP will time out after 90 seconds. So to now get that policy to kick in, this has to time out of the flow table. So we'll wait 90 seconds. And what should happen is then we'll kick off the ICMP, just like the TCP flow, then we should see a deny for ICMP traffic. So still there. It's going to take ages now. While we're doing that, while we're waiting for that, let's just pop into the PSM then and just do a refresh on that. And just to look at what PSM is telling us. So let's have a look. So you can see now tenants under policies, we've got VLAN 10. Let's have a look. VLAN 10 under networks. And yeah, so that's effectively what we've got applied through this particular policy. So if I click on that, it will tell me the details of what I push through AFC. Do remember, of course, we need PSM. PSM is effectively the intelligence that pushes the config or the flows policy down onto the DSS. So this is the effectively a direct reflection of what we have done through AFC. AFC is connected to the PSM by the API, applied the policy configuration to the PSM, which has then pushed it via API down to the DSS switch. So let's have a look now.
Sorry, Steve, can I just answer one question while we're on that screen? Can you?
Yes, of course, yeah.
Sorry, can you just go back to the PSM and go to the network screen? And I know you've mentioned it, but I just want to be clear on this. Where you've got obviously the VLAN and there is no ingress policy applied, the default rule is to allow all. Where a policy name is applied, the bottom rule is an implicit deny. And I just think that people just need to be aware of that. Where there is no ingress rule applied, it's a default allow.
Right. Yes. Good. Thank you, Toby. Could you mind typing that in chat, Toby?
Yeah,
so we've got a record for that for everyone. Thank you. Right. So where was I? Yes. Back to the flow table. Yes. I think now we've got no ICMP in the flow table. That looks like it's gone. So if I now go into my Windows, and now we're blocking ICMP. Great. Okay, so that was it from the demo side. I don't think I've got anything else that I wanted to show.
There's just one question that's come up actually for your demo, please. Steve, can you show the running config on the switch to show there's no configuration of the Pensando chip within the actual CXOS?
Oh yeah, sure, yeah. Let's have a look. So let's exit out of there because I'm in the shell run. So yeah, we've got the usual VRFs at the top here, moving down, we've got interface management, our system interface groups, lag for VSX, and our ports, trunks up into our hosts, into our ESX environment. What else? Keep alive for VSX. What else? And then we've got some gateways here. Yeah, and that's it.